Hi everyone, my name's Tom Hall. I'm part of Sport England's extended workforce and I'm hosted by Active Gloucestershire. Thank you for joining us today. We're here just to have a conversation around physical literacy and particularly thinking about positive experiences and experiences in general with movement. So I'm joined by four colleagues. So without further ado, I'd just like to pass you over to them just to say who they are and where they work. So if I go over to Gareth first. Hi Gareth.
Hi Tom, hi everyone. I'm Gareth Diggs. I am Director of Strategic Relationships with Active Dev, and I work on lots of health system stuff and also do some national stuff like you, Tom, with extended workforce. So that's me.
Want to pass on, Gareth? I'll go to Lawrence.
Did you say Lawrence? Yeah, go for Lawrence.
Hi everyone, I'm Lawrence Foweather. I'm a researcher and lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University in physical activity. I also led the Physical Literacy Consensus Statement for England project. I'll pass over to Jess.
Yep, hi everyone, I'm Jessica Simons. I'm the Active Children Lead at Greater Manchester Moving, and so sit within the Children and Young People team of the Active Partnership for Greater Manchester.
Hi, and I'm Hayley. So I'm Hayley Lever, and I'm Chief Exec at PM Moving, and a recent convert to the language of physical literacy and the joy of movement.
Fabulous. Thank you all. Nice to see you all today. Thanks for your time. So I think we'll just, this will be a fairly informal conversation as we know, but if we're obviously here to talk about physical literacy and we're thinking about our relationship with movement throughout our life, as I kind of said in the introduction there. So just to start off at a kind of personal level, really, if you could maybe share with us what's your relationship been with movement through your life? It's quite a big question. Just what's been your experience, just from a personal point of view, before we kind of get into that kind of work side of things. Throw it open to the floor.
That moment of quiet. Do you want me to jump in to do that?
I'd love you to.
Yeah, I think things I would say straight away are connection, relationships with others, the sense of belonging. I think that that's been a theme for me in terms of moving more, and it kind of fell quite naturally in early life as well. On kind of that backdrop of South Wales and sort of a bit of industrial breakdown and the sort of parents being, really busy and let the kids just do life. And therefore, when I guess kids do life back in the sort of later 80s, it was you naturally start moving more together and start building friendships and connections and start adventuring and doing those kinds of things. And I think the Friends for Life thing is very true through the sort of platform of sport and physical activity. And I think probably the lasting memory is the creativity that comes with it. You could be who you want. You could do what you want. You have this canvas of a space in front of you and you can make it up as you go along. And the local park or the allotment, the space in the allotment was called Wembley, or the bit of tarmac in the car park was called Lords, or the bit of there was a coal tip near us, and that was called Cardiff Arms Park. So and the stories that you could kind of unfold with that were lifelong and lasting. But yeah, that sense of belonging with friends and to be able to create an adventure stuff. So yeah, that's me.
I love that. There was tarmac we called Lords. Thank you very much, Gareth.
With potholes, Tom.
With
tarmac
potholes.
There's a dodgy wicket.
There's a sticky wicket. Yeah, indeed. Fabulous. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. I think in terms of my relationship with movement kind of over my life, I think the first thing that comes to mind is I've been lucky enough to have a relatively positive relationship with movement, I think, from as long as I can remember. I think probably similar to Gareth, I was kind of left to get on with it. Don't know if that's because I was a twin and you can't kind of keep an eye on two children at the same time as easily as one. But I always been remembered given the freedom to move and the freedom to kind of explore and kind of take part in kind of movement as I wanted to, play as I wanted to. I played out, which was, I thought was really crucial to kind of some of the skills that I learned through kind of physical movement, not just those physical skills, but just kind of silly things like, as Gareth mentioned around kind of, you had your local park, which was seen as your Wembley, but actually some of the times you went over and you didn't know whose ball it was, and actually you had to kind of work and speak to people to find out whose ball it was. Could you play? Conflict management, something goes wrong, there's not an adult there. So my relationship with movement has been positive, and it kind of went from kind of unstructured, informal play to kind of the more team sports and individual sports. So yeah, I think it's been positive, but it's definitely changed throughout my life. But I think the foundations of it was built in that opportunity to move.
Fantastic, thank you. Something about changing and evolving we might come back to further on in the conversation, but I'll just move it on now. Lawrence or Hayley?
I'll jump in then. Very similar to Jessica, really. Really positive relationship, very fortunate, especially in early childhood and adolescence. Loads of play, unstructured activity kind of in the back garden with my siblings, lots of team sports, and I think really developed that love of being a teammate and playing with other people, really. Probably a less positive relationship since my early 30s, more injuries and kind of maybe a bit of a less opportunity to engage due to having very young children since then, really. So still very passionate, but engagement definitely has suffered, and I guess that's why I like physical literacy as a concept, really. It kind of helps us to understand that our engagement does change throughout our life course for different factors.
Thank you. Brilliant. Hayley?
Yeah, similar, really fortunate early experiences on reflection, and then I suppose similar threads for me through about family, about friends, outdoor play, freedom to roam, explore, and like that roaming. I think there's stuff about this and about that roaming distance. When I think about it, like how my roaming distance grew as I got older, and that even is associated with from playing out in the street and on the green opposite, the ball around, to then being allowed to go to the common and the pit top and go that bit further, and then eventually get the bus into town and go swimming and go and use the leisure centre in the city. I grew up in Coventry, so and then the kind of like the structured side of what happened in school and what happened in the community spaces around us, and then the really informal and structured way of my sort of childhood and adolescent years. And then over my life, it's just struck me really what a common thread movement, physical activity, sport has been, and that how my relationship with it is still evolving now, and how my understanding of what I enjoy and why I enjoy it is still becoming clearer and clearer to me particularly as I've reflected on this most recently, and I hope it will continue to. That's the other thing. At this midpoint in my life, it's wondering then where will I end, what will I end up doing, and why in the next 20, 30 years.
Great, thank you all for sharing some really quite personal experiences. Common themes and words that just I'm picking out is quite a lot of outdoors, references to being outdoors there, creativity, play, social connections, and also as I think it was Lawrence said, that sort of changing relationship over time, or maybe it was Jess. So just on that, just I'm liberally borrowing from Jess's session here at the Greater Manchester Conference. If we pick a date, if I pluck a day out, if you could maybe just reflect on maybe your relationship with movement then compared to now, if you're happy to share that. I'm just interested as a bit of just as a straw poll. Let's pick 2013. Put you on the spot here. How were maybe things different there in terms of your personal relationship with movement to, what are we now, 10th of April 2024? It's really putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there.
Go on.
Yeah, 2013, I would be 40. So, and I know it's off the tip of my tongue because I've thought about this a lot this last year as I turned 50. Because I was then
Right.
looking back and going, because I'd sort of had a bit of a personal goal about could I get to the point where I was fit as I was when I was 40. 40, I ran my fastest marathon, and it felt like a really kind of transformative time in my life because my children were becoming a little bit more. So I was probably coming out of where Lawrence is now, and getting a bit more time and space and freedom to focus on me again after, and the kids are probably into sort of late primary school, early secondary school years. Reclaiming a bit of my own identity, I think, and at 40. And then getting fit and training and sort of focused. And again, there's so much of this, like Gareth said earlier, is about friendship, because the thing that's in all of this for me, it's all the relationships. So at that time, if I think about who I was active with is also different to who I'm active with now, and the spaces and places I use now. So 10 years on, so back then I was reclaiming my own identity and space and focusing on actually having a goal and running a marathon. And it was very much about the community of where I live, in Derbyshire, and the people that I'd met when we had our children, and this group of women who we started going on these weekend sort of trips every 2 years to go and run or do something, and have a like girls' weekend with an event as the sort of I don't know why we needed permission, but you know what I mean? A sense of permission to take some time out as a bunch of friends. And so now, like I work in a different place. So I'm now in Manchester and I'm running on a track in Manchester. I never run on a track in my life till last year. So it's and actually this last year or so, I've realised just how much I value solitude in my running in particular. But then I've started playing basketball again for the first time in 20 years, which I stopped playing when I had my kids. And I go to this amazing basketball session now where we don't even keep the score. We just have a real good laugh. And it's just a whole bunch of women who I barely know. We just play once a week together. So, so back that, very different kind of points in time in my life. My children are all older adults and they're leaving home now. So now I'm like, well, I can do whatever I want. Sorry, Lawrence, that's not really bit gloaty.
Lawrence, do you want to respond?
Wounded. I've got a few more years to go, haven't I? I think I was 33 10 years ago. So actually I was injured. So actually I think I was probably not engaging for different reasons really, and I kind of developed osteoarthritis in my feet and ankles, which is not really a good injury to have really at that age. Too much football, ironically. So I think really actually one of the things for me has been probably learning about the activities that I can do and actually that don't provide any further consequences for my injuries really, and that required a bit of education really and understanding really around what would work for me really going forward. So I try and do things like now where I've got spin bike and try and get on the bike and do things like that really, and just playing with the kids is probably more my active life now really, which I really enjoy. It's nice to watch them kind of explore different movements in different contexts, and it's funny, my little boy he's 3, and his craziest movements are when he gets out of the bath just before he goes to bed. So in between getting his pajamas on and getting to bed and coming out of the bath, he pulls out some crazy funky moves. I just don't know where they've come from. They're so creative and fluid, and it's amazing to watch. So I kind of love that joyous, spontaneous movement just because really, and it gives me life just to kind of watch that.
I've got a great image of bath time. Thank you, Lawrence. It's brilliant. Gareth, Jess, any more thoughts on this?
I don't mind jumping in quickly. It's quite interesting actually. So 2013, 43. And there was an interesting dynamic for me because when I was 17, I was introduced to the sea because I was brought up in a kind of the valleys and I'd never really been there. And I got lent a polystyrene surfboard, and country and wider. So in 1943, I was not even born. And when I was 43, I was sat in the sea. And I think there was a massive change in terms of being in nature, and about, probably at that age as well, about the value of being active in nature for my mental health and the resilience that it gave me. Because there were sort of personal challenges going on, there was bereavement, there was stuff that was happening, and I thought, my gosh, if I didn't have this, I don't know, I genuinely don't know where I'd be or what I'd be doing or how I'd be managing. And it's as simple as and as succinct as that. It expedited me towards a way of dealing with a lot of things, and that, you know, at that point I was working with cancer patients as well, and doing some work around physical activity, and I was interfacing with people who were in certain chapters of their life and managing really, really, really difficult things. So my own sort of this is just fun was actually turning a little bit into this is fun and this is absolutely essential and life-changing for myself at that point, but also for the people I was working with at that point as well. So there was definitely a lot more thought about the value of this and what it really means to these individuals that I'm working with. So yeah.
Gareth, thank you. I can wholeheartedly relate to that around mental health as well. Jess.
Yeah, so 2013, I was 23. And I think I do say that with a bit of a smile on my face, but yeah, I think yeah, this was actually, thinking back to this, this is probably the kind of transition period for me in terms of why I took part in activity. And it went from kind of, previously I'd taken part in activity because there was that kind of play opportunity and then that formal teams and individual sport opportunity. And I understood what that gave me in terms of probably the typical kind of things that we associate with movement, in terms of that, you know, the development of skills and kind of connection with friends and things like that. But what I realised kind of during this time was I was just kind of getting my career off the ground. I'd finished uni. I was working for a coaching company, but I was travelling quite a distance each day, doing ridiculous amounts of steps while I was coaching, but I wasn't actually coming home to do anything formally. I wasn't part of a team at that point. But what I then picked up was kind of, I reverted back to what I'd built in confidence as a younger person, which was the fact that I could run. So I chose to get out and I would go for runs when I could be bothered after doing 25,000 steps, coaching all day for 7 hours. And I would go out and I'd run, and I realised that the running, it wasn't for me. I still always had that little bit of competitiveness in me. I'd go out and I think, oh, I'll just go for a run, it's okay. You know, I don't need to beat my time, I don't need to be fast, I've just got out the door. But I realised how important that was to then supporting my mental health, and it was just kind of low kind of lying kind of things of anxiety and things like that, that actually I realised I got quite angst if I didn't get out and just do this run. But there was no structure to it necessarily. I was able to kind of tap into my previous physical kind of ability, but also confidence to be able to use physical activity and movement to help me in a different way rather than it being structured. So yeah, kind of that time was a time when I wasn't doing anything structured, but I also looked at how physical activity supported me in a different way. So yeah, that was me at 23.
Great. Thank you all for the flashback in time. And thanks for sharing your personal story. It's fascinating. We have to move on, unfortunately. We could do loads more on that alone, I know. What's interesting, I think, is you've already probably brought out quite a few of the key aspects of physical literacy. But just to zoom back out now, if we go over to Lawrence, so I know you led the work on the physical literacy consensus statement. Could you maybe just sort of give us a little bit of a sense of how it came about and what that is, before we then start to move on to kind of how it's starting to shape some of our work and some of those stories?
Yeah, sure, Tom. So I guess, well, my background as a researcher really is that I've been researching factors that influence why some people are active and other people aren't active for about 20 years really. And 10 years ago, I came across the pioneering work of Dr. Margaret Whitehead and the game-changing concept of physical literacy. And what I liked about the concept was that it kind of moved beyond kind of just physical skills and technique, and it kind of talked about holistic development of the person in terms of helping to support them to be active. And since kind of that period of Margaret Whitehead's work, really, the concept has grown among individuals and organisations nationally and internationally, and that was fantastic. But what happened was that there became lots of different perspectives and interpretations of physical literacy and what it was. And the concept kind of became quite contested and hotly debated. And those tensions really, mostly in the academic literature, were kind of hampering its process for implementation in practice. And it becomes really difficult to advocate for physical literacy when you've got different individuals and organisations conceiving it differently, really. So the concept was in danger of being lost, and that was important to me because I think it's really important as a concept, and it is a game-changing concept for engagement. So the aim of the consensus statement really was to develop a shared understanding of what physical literacy is, why it's important, and how it can be supported, with the aim of catalysing efforts to adopt it, support it, and implement it in practice. So luckily we were funded by Sport England and the National Lottery to develop the consensus statement, and that kind of follows similar work that has taken place in Australia, Canada, Northern Ireland and Ireland, and also China, to develop the shared understanding.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think we'll probably pick up elements of it, and it might be quite interesting for you to kind of jump in where there's the sort of parts of the consensus statement that we refer to through the collective work, if that's okay, rather than go through that now. So you talk about getting it into practice, and I think that's what this next bit leads to, really. It's so I guess to the others on the panel, really interested to hear how did you start, or how have you started to get involved in this work, and how's physical literacy sort of helping you? How are you working, playing with that physical literacy, positive experiences piece through your work at the minute? And that's open to anyone.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that Jess went first, actually, because she was sort of certainly my route into this. So I don't know if Jess, if you want to set the scene from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think our kind of journey with kind of this physical literacy and this new consensus statement started, as a result of the launch that happened back in September of 23. And I'll be perfectly honest. I think when kind of it was the launch came out, it was a little bit like, what is this? What's this about? Having kind of worked in kind of coaching and sport development for the past kind of 14 years or so, physical literacy wasn't a new term to myself, but it was probably one that I had kind of misconceptions potentially about, or kind of previous understanding about. So it was kind of quite novel. It was going to launch a new statement for this kind of term, really. So we got the opportunity to go down, obviously, to London for the launch as part of the Active Partnership, and myself and the strategic lead for children and young people, Christine Bland, attended. And it was very quickly kind of being in the room that I realised that this absolutely shouldn't be siloed within the children and young people work that we're doing, and actually that this needs to be understood right across the life course. And yes, obviously we know that we potentially start to build the foundations and start our relationship with physical literacy, as a child and young person, as an under 5, and potentially some people would argue even before that, within the womb. But actually, the importance of everybody within kind of the workforce of DM Moving, understanding that if we can understand people's relationship with movement, regardless of their age, we can help ensure that we tailor and provide positive experiences of movement moving forward, but also understand what's potentially stopped them from taking part previously, and therefore we can kind of change our practice, our approach, our understanding moving forward. So it was at that point. Oh, I'm just going to repeat that. It was at that point, at leaving the consensus statement launch, that I felt it important to come back, kind of have the conversation with Hayley as our chief exec to say, look, like, this is a real opportunity now to kind of shine the light on the importance of providing positive experiences to children and young people, and look at it through the lens of physical literacy, but also how important this is across the life course. And I think having you there will really help us to kind of show the importance of that outside of the children and young people work. And that's when I invited Hayley down to come to the next meeting, and also then to kind of work together with our team on what this meant for everybody within their roles. So hopefully that's answered the question. If not, Hayley, you're going to come in and hopefully fill in the gaps.
Follow on from there? Yeah. So that was quite pivotal for me, because like Jess, I'd gone, I think I know what physical literacy is, and what I had in my head was actually fundamentals of movement and the work we'd done over sort of early years work in previous sort of years gone by. And when I looked at the visuals and the information, it's like one of those sort of, Jess and Chris brought back these leaflets and put them on the table in our team meeting, and I went, oh, hang on a minute, this is something completely different what I thought it was. And realising that this is going to change our complete worldview, I suppose, can change our mindsets and beliefs and assumptions about the way we even think about movement. It gives us a language that we can work with. It gives us an entirely different way of talking about movement. It's changed the way I talk to my children about movement. Even just last night, my daughter was floating the idea that she might sign up to start running, and actually I immediately reflected to her that it is if you can find your way into running, it is the best stress relief that you can get, that's very low cost, can do it anywhere, you can do it, blah blah blah. And so I would have a conversation now that is different because of the way I'm now thinking about relationship with movement, value, meaning, enjoyment. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking this aligns. We do so much work in GM Moving and around changing culture, beliefs, mindsets, assumptions, worldview, that's in that space. And if we could, as Jess says, kind of unleash its potential from the being seen as a pure CYP thing, then actually, God, we could change the world in terms of the way we all think and talk about movement. And in terms of practically, that is in everyday conversations in our team and our work. Even yesterday in our team meeting, one of our team was doing a presentation around trans inclusion work that we're doing, and weaving the language of value, meaning, enjoyment into the key messages around everyone has a right to an active life. How do we support people to have, to find a positive relationship over their life? In any, you could translate it into anything we're doing on any given day. So that was the key thing. And I suppose something about the kind of leadership practice and Jess's leadership in that moment was not putting our arms around it and going, this belongs to us, this is ours, we're gonna, there's no ego in that. It was just like, actually, there's a mission we're on here. It's really important that I open this up and recognise that it belongs to everybody. And I think there's just something in the behaviours around it that also is important to notice.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you both. I think it's interesting to hear you both talk about, as a result of this, it sounds and feels like there's been some changes already in behavior and in language. And we're talking about those two things that can go across anywhere. And you've given some great examples of that. And I think that probably leads quite nicely to some of the work, Gareth, that you've just started to do locally in Devon. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, we're literally at the embryonic stage of exploring this, probably beyond the sort of children and young people focus, using the principles and the narratives. And I think the narratives and the language is really helpful because it's just really accessible. So our lead, Rebecca Skinner, introduced me to the concept of physical literacy and the work that's come from Lawrence and team, and another guy, Gethin Mon Thomas, has been involved with us as well. And so I kind of got this as someone who's worked in the health system for a long time, I kind of got the opportunity for the blinkers to go, because in some ways, and I'm constantly challenging myself, but when you work in health, and I appreciate many will have views on this, you can get quite focused on science and the science of stuff and the technicality of stuff, say the benefit of physical activity, and we often think about in kind of how we translate that maybe in a health landscape. It can often be, you know, health and care practice conversations with patients around the benefit of and this kind of thing, and I sort of scratched my head and thought, whoa, wouldn't it be amazing if we just park that for a minute and just got to have conversations about the relationship that people have, and the meaning that physical activity may have for people, maybe in a health context. So we had to go two things. The first thing was a bit of an experiment with health and care practitioners. So we talked to GPs who may have initially had conversations that were quite technical, perhaps, and said, what would it look like, and what's your thoughts if we just started engaging with you about your relationship with physical activity, and how would that influence your interaction with patients if we just started to have a conversation with you and help you think about your own experience. And that was fascinating, because that gave general practitioners an opportunity to go, well, what do I actually think about this? And then we started to think, hang on a minute, does that help the empathy connection as well, in terms of health and care practice with patients? You know, because if a practitioner, health professionals had challenges themselves, that empathy thing just increases, the vulnerability aspect of it increases. And would that not help a greater engagement around the subject? So we started asking those questions and got some fascinating insight, and we're still working on that as part of a piece of exploration. And the second bit, I had a go within a big-ish health system online meeting around tackling health inequalities, and I had all these kind of people who work in systems. And I said the agenda number one is we'll go around the room, and I just want to ask the question about your own sense of meaning with regard to physical activity and movement, and just bring an experience to the table. Big lesson, don't put 15 minutes to that agenda item ever. Everything else went out the window, but oh my goodness, how to bring 15 people together in a room who are trying to do some serious work, just through sharing those experiences. And I again, we make judgments all the time, don't we? And sadly, we do that. In some ways, we can make quick judgments, and we know nothing about people's lives. And yet, physical activity and our question enables us to unlock a greater understanding of who the people are we're even working with. And when you can do that, you can do so much more on other stuff. So it just felt like the question itself, from physical literacy about meaning and positive experiences of value, created a strengthening of relationship to do bigger work. So it's kind of a bit of a paradigm changing experience for me at the moment, and we're right in it. And I don't know where it's going to go. So you know, so watch this space. But I'm really grateful that the permission has been given in a kind of way through this statement. So yeah, it's
can I just follow up on that,
yeah.
Gareth, I think as well, because that reminded me of over lockdown when we were doing the kind of conversations and engagement in developing the GM moving strategy. It was in lockdown, and so we had loads and loads of sessions online, and so almost by chance we been trying to think about how you break the ice and how you develop that sort of like human interaction on Zoom and Teams calls. We used pretty standard in the end the question of how does moving matter to you in your work, as a way of just opening up, and then it became one of the most valuable parts of the kind of strategy and conversations, because for all the reasons you said, and it doesn't matter what I learned during that period, was it doesn't matter what job people do or which sector or which part of the system they're from. If you ask people to reflect personally and professionally on how moving matters to them and their work, we had people from right across hierarchies talking about what they were seeing happen with their children or their elderly parents or their sort of during lockdown. And then it opened up this whole sense of like, the meaning and value of movement is so much more than we ever imagined it was. And that was so powerful. And like you, I think this work gives permission to, because we felt like we were dabbling around and playing around with something there that was sort of in a bit of isolation. And the fact that this opens up a space where across the whole country and internationally we might allow ourselves to ask questions like that, because, and similarly in our health systems work, opening up how do you have conversations around movement, making it human and relatable and personal and professional is absolutely vital. And we've over professionalized. We need both. It's like it is the data on the evidence and it's the stories and it's the human. But it's we need to create the space for that more and more of the time, I think.
Can I just come in and just piggyback onto that as well? Because I think the thing that I really reflected on when I kind of took this back to the team and myself and Hayley did a session is, you know, Hayley's just posed that question there that, you know, used to be posed at the start of meetings over COVID about why moving matters to you. I think the bit that physical literacy in this consensus statement launch allowed me to kind of think about was that before part, what made moving matter to you, and then also the what will help continue to make moving matter for you. And I think those are kind of two questions in terms of when we talk about language, in terms of how we potentially talk about physical literacy. That's sometimes a better way of framing it, away from sometimes maybe the language that physical literacy might be associated with in terms of quite academic, for example. So it was, that gave me a really good reflection to do that. And then I think, you know, the information and the work that Gareth has started to do around with the healthcare system and the healthcare practitioners, that is exactly the kind of work that we're looking to do in Greater Manchester across kind of all the different systems. But if you talk about kind of specifically within my work as children and young people, we see the parallels in education. You know, actually, if we can sit down with those in education, you know, when we're asking them, for example, to take a whole school approach to physical activity, if you've got a teacher there that actually has had a negative experience potentially of movement, or their relationship with movement is not as positive, are they going to want to engage as readily in that opportunity to create chances for their young people within their settings to move as often? So I think just there's loads of parallels with kind of what Gareth's doing over with kind of in the health stuff to what we're trying to do at Greater Manchester Moving as well. And then I think that point around language as well, just the fact that it's just allowed me to think about the before and after rather than why it just matters now.
And I think what's exciting is not so long ago, we heard from colleagues from Dorset and other areas as well, sharing other areas of work or even similarities in terms of what's starting to shift in terms of approach. So I mean, you've kind of answered my next question really, which is great. It was what's sort of different about physical literacy and what are the kind of possibilities for change. So I'm hearing a lot around kind of personal connection, language, and very much evidently change, you know, that's starting to happen. Is there anything else you'd like to add just around that before we move on? Or Lawrence, anything you want to reflect on in terms of, you know, that bringing this consensus statement to life here? Because what I think we're seeing and hearing is loads of examples of, you know, we have the consensus statement there, and then that so what piece. Well, actually, there's bits in health, there's bits in education. People are taking it and taking elements of that, and then actually going out and working with that to change some of how we work and some of those key elements and behaviours and languages. Anything else before we move on that?
I guess, you know, really rich conversations there. I think for me it was really interesting to hear how actually it's been used as a bridge to connect you to different stakeholders as well through those conversations, which is probably something we never really envisaged would be possible with this really. I think, you know, Jessica made the key points really around life course. You know, really important to remember that although this was funded from Sport England's Children and Young People Directorate, this is very much a life course concept. And, you know, Gareth's work in health, and Jessica, you mentioned education. You know, this is something that's got relevance across different sectors, you know, health, education, environment, community, active travel, whatever really. It's relevant for everything, because it's also about well, it's about engagement, and that ultimately is a goal across these different sectors. So yeah, I think the key part of the point around it being an intrinsic driver, you know, when people are talking about meaning and value and what matters to them, it's that intrinsic drive is going to be the most powerful. And I think what we're trying to advocate for really is a bit of a shift from just solely focusing on kind of health related messages to ones that kind of build on feelings and effect, to try and drive people's engagement.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've done a bit about the now. If we look a little bit in terms of the future, then what do you think will help this work fulfill its potential, and what might get in the way? So where do we go from here, I guess, is that question. What are those opportunities? We've explored some of those, but what might other opportunities be if we're going to reach for the moon a little bit, and what might get in the way of that?
I'm happy to come in if you want, in terms of just thinking about how I've thought about this work in terms of the opportunities for Greater Manchester. But I think for me, the opportunity is that it kind of keeps the conversation going around the importance of positive experiences for children, for the children and people, but across the life course, and the power and the importance of that fun, enjoyment, value in actually supporting sustained, engaged participation in movement and physical activity. And that actually, if we start with that in terms of that meaning and that relationship, rather than the importance of the development of skills to allow people to excel, I think that's a really good starting point. So I think it gives us opportunity to just start the conversation with a different kind of narrative in terms of thinking about that relationship. In terms of kind of challenges, I think the challenges come from probably similar to how we've articulated so far, maybe an understanding of what physical literacy was previously, the fact that it potentially is siloed within children and young people, it being seen as another thing rather than an umbrella that effectively it sits across everything that we do. And I think with that, we have to be realistic about listening to the challenge. So listening to the fact that actually, you know, this might not be language that lands exactly with people and it makes sense. So how do we change the language that we're using to talk about this? How do we ensure that depending on the different networks that we're working with, how do we ensure that this language is appropriate? I think language is a challenge as well as an opportunity. So I think that is kind of, from my perspective, what I see so far. It's about kind of listening and hearing where we're at now with this kind of concept, and then looking at where we can go in terms of the future, really, in terms of the opportunity to kind of really put this concept into practice.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. I think that's really interesting as well, that where it's working, but maybe where there's been some challenge, how can we feed that back? How can we learn from that? Where do we put that? Where would we take that to? Is something that's come up a little bit already in discussion. Thank you. Anybody else?
I think I really value the way that this does enable engagement, and I think that can be an opportunity and a lever for systemic change, because we talk about system change quite a lot, but and when you actually get to grips with their systems are made up of organizations or people, and people will have their experiences of and sense of meaning around. So it feels like to me that you can have system influencing conversations, but how far they go is often dependent right the way down to individuals' own experiences and feelings about things. And that intrinsic and extrinsic thing is really important, where you have the opportunity to surface the right conversation about meaning that taps into sort of that intrinsic notion and that sort of self-determination aspect, and it gives permission for individuals to be able to rethink and challenge their own notion of physical activity, and that can actually have an effect on views within kind of really important systemic environments. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans and probably parents, or, you know, and we have, you know, we're managing family environments, or, you know, varied environments, managing health conditions and various things like that. So it gives us the opportunity to do that. And I think the challenge with that is, one, go in there, you know, because this is kind of going deep, and there's the vulnerability that comes with it, there's the emotion, there's the feeling element, and I think that's so strong. Finding the right balance of that with the reality of the science of it is important. I was touched on earlier. So I think there's something about leadership in going there, making space to go there and have those conversations is important. And I think there's probably something about patience, or the reality that this isn't like a switch, flicking a switch, you know, these are complex things and take time. So it's about protecting the time as well as the courage to go there, protecting the time to sustain the conversation there. And because it might not be right, we've done that, let's move on, because it kind of doesn't work like that. So I think that's a leadership thing as well, you know, at all levels. You know, that's a self-leadership to be able to say, I'm going to go there and I'm going to maintain this conversation. So yeah, they're my thoughts on that.
Hayley?
I think there's a lot in there that resonates in both what you've just said about the sustained. So Lawrence and I, when we first met, we had this great conversation about the integrity of the evidence, and we about the, you know, how do you protect the integrity and the depth of the research, the evidence, the data that has led to this tangible thing, which is a statement and a leaflet, and you know, that it's a tool, and then you take that tool and allow it to change culture and change the world. And so that's where my head is that it takes patience, and it takes impatience, and it takes the test of it, what we would see and feel and hear. For me, is that I'm still using the language of meaning, value and enjoyment in 2, 3, 5, 10 years time in my work, because it's not something that came and went and I forgot about it. It's just becomes embedded and becomes normal part of language, and that the language shifts that, and the traces of change that we see in culture as language changes in this work and in society as a whole, that you'd be able to look back from 10 years ago and go, God, do you remember we used to talk about physical activity, sport like this? And now, you know, in 10 years time, I'd like to convene rooms from people from adult social care and health and transport and the environment and all the spaces and places, and for no one to say, well, I don't really know if I should be here because I'm not sporty enough, or I'm not really, you know, which is what we've heard, isn't it, over the years. So I think this, and I don't know what the evaluation kind of plans are around this work, Lawrence, but how do we capture the value and the journey of the traces, change in culture, change in practice, change in language, change in behaviours, and then ultimately the change in a society that moves, you know, a nation that moves, and a nation that values movement in a completely different way. And that, you know, that is long-term, like Gareth says, that's long-term change, but we also need to see change happen every single day in what we see and feel and hear in our teams, in our places, and in our families and our communities. So I'm full of, you know, I'm super optimistic about what's possible here, because I think I know we've learned a lot in the last certainly 5-10 years of my career about how to change culture, and we see and feel it all the time. So I'm just hoping Lawrence has got a really rich evaluation tool that's going to capture all this change that we're going to see, and we have seen already.
No pressure, Lawrence. Just before we get to that's kind of leading on to the kind of almost last question, really. What might that future look like if this goes well? You know, and there's obviously, we're in that sort of initial bit. What will we start to see, feel, hear if this really starts to take hold and make a difference? And I totally hear what you say, Gareth, about it taking time and that leadership. I think that's really important. But if we were to go 10, whatever many years into the future, what might that look like, you think, if this was to go really well? Hayley, you've given us a great example there in terms of, some of that language used and that how people may view things. Anything else that anyone would like to share what it might look like? I mean, I've got one. We talked about this before, didn't we? We were just saying language in terms of my own reflection about how I've chatted to my own children, my lads, in terms of expectations and viewing things differently. That's already started to shift as a result of talking to people, listening to people, exploring this with Hayley, yourself, and others in the group, and Lawrence and others as well. So, but yeah, any thoughts? Any other shifts?
Yeah, I think the one big thing that we haven't really focused on here is about inequalities. We haven't really focused on it in the conversation today, but I know for sure that if we brought about this culture change, the way we talk about movement, we would create the conditions for wider and more diverse. Like we hear in our work all the time the way that people have been excluded and marginalised and traumatised by PE and sport over their lives, and I honestly think that this is key to making that a future that we don't see. I'm just thinking about the LGBTQ plus network that I host. The stories I hear in that room are horrific about how people have been excluded and marginalised through their experiences as young people. Now, if you thought about any kind of marginalised, excluded group and the inequalities that exist, this is absolutely fundamental to it, because it's driven, the past has been driven by competition, segregation, excluding practice. So this has got massive potential. I haven't really kind of fully formed my thinking there, but I think that's something we should make sure is always a part of our conversations about it, if it's really going to take. Because in society, I suppose where I would finish up for me is that if you were then measuring active lives data or whatever we're using in 10 or 20 years' time, and we're looking at inequalities and population scale change in movement and activity behaviour, we would see very, very different outcomes, because we've created a world in which everyone can find meaning, value and enjoyment in movement.
I think that's brilliant, and where my mind was going to is I feel up to a point we've probably, and it's a broad statement, transacted physical activity. There's something about just a transaction of it, maybe in a school or physical education environment, or in a kind of even a coaching environment, we transact it, programmatize, etc. And I think this gives us the opportunity for it to be far more transformational, which is in a different paradigm, and that does start with asking the right questions in the right spaces, in an empathic and a vulnerability inducing relational way. And I think the world that I would see is probably those intergenerationals. We talked about life course, and I like intergenerational kind of I like that kind of intergenerational notion where the stories of the grandparents are so conducive to meaning and intrinsic kind of processing around moving more, and it's seamless. Do you know what I mean? It's seamless and intuitive. And the stories of parents, or the stories of children to grandparents, are equally as powerful, and they become seamless, and nobody has to put things into algorithms, into computers, in order for that to happen. And I appreciate that maybe a huge utopia, but I think those kinds of transformational behaviors where it becomes seamless and not even thought about are probably an underpinning element of tackling or contributing to tackling greater inequality in itself. So yeah, let's hope for that.
Thank you. Hope being the key word. Thank you ever so much. Just to finish off, because I'm mindful of time here, Lawrence, was there anything you want to come back in on in terms of if someone's listening to this or watching this and they'd like to learn a little bit more, what would be our suggestions. Any sort of further thoughts about where we could suggest people go and look at and find out a bit more about physical literacy, consensus statements, and any further reflections from yourself in terms of what the future might look like in that evaluation piece?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, you can find the physical literacy consensus statement for England on the Sport England website. If you just Google that, you'll get to that. You'll get both the full statement. I do encourage people to read the full statement. It's really important because it does impact the concept in a lot of detail. You know, the statement was co-developed with 60 different expert panel members from 50 different organisations. It's a truly, genuinely collaborative effort, and literally every single word in that statement was thought over to an extent. So you look at that. The visuals are also great. They're a great way to kind of capture people's attention and nicely summarize the work too. And I think, you know, that they definitely pull out the key language that we've talked about today. So today we've had a lot of chat around meaning and value and enjoyment. But I think the other thing to mention is as well in the statement is around move, connect, think and feel. So those kind of areas of learning and development that really are about the foundation for our positive relationship. And essentially it's about developing those areas to a level really that allows us to engage in a way we want to engage, however that might be. So they're really important. And I think actually when we talk about language and shifting forward 10 years, I'd like to hear that language being used quite frequently too. Move, connect, think and feel, because it's very simply put for physical, social, cognitive and affective development. Really, it's what we're kind of talking about there. In terms of next steps from an evaluation perspective, we are open to funding for a support evaluation. We will try and pick something up definitely a year post launch. So around September, we'll try and do something where we try and capture some information from Sport England system partners on the magnitude of different ways in which the statement's being used. And it's been great to hear from you guys today around your experiences and kind of what you've been doing in terms of putting the statement into practice already, which is fantastic. And it's great to hear about the messaging being effective, because ultimately this statement was about a shared understanding of physical literacy and using really accessible language that everyone can kind of connect with, because we know the importance of language in terms of connecting with people and changing agendas going forward. So yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, I'd echo all that. Just really thank you all for your time, just to share. I think what's interesting for me is just the range of examples just within this small group. We're starting to see and hear about how it's been taken and principles of that statement being used, being tested, being tried, and then coming together and just exploring some of that. So it's a really great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Personally, I'd love to come back and try this again in sort of 3 or 4 months' time and see what's shifted and maybe invite some others into that space too. But yeah, thanks ever so much, and lovely to see you all.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, cheers, Tom.
Cheers.
Um,